I had promised myself that this Christmas would be simple but warm, even if it was just me and my little girl sharing a small plate of pasta in our tiny apartment. But by the time my shift ended on Christmas Eve, my bones ached like they were made of wet sand, and the cold December wind felt sharp enough to cut. I dragged myself into the grocery store with Mia's small hand wrapped in mine, ready to buy the few ingredients that would let us pretend the night was special. The lights inside buzzed harshly, reflecting on the gray linoleum floor and making everything feel colder than outside. I scanned the shelves quickly, tossing pasta tomato sauce, a loaf of discounted bread, and a small packet of cocoa into a basket. It was all I could afford, and yet I rehearsed in my head how excited Mia would be when the cocoa warmed her hands. At the register, I smiled at her and whispered that we would have a cozy Christmas dinner no matter what. She smiled back that wide, trusting smile only a child can give, and it made me forget for a moment how tight my chest felt. Then the cashier scanned everything, read the total, and I swiped my EBT card. The screen blinked red. Declined. She tried again, louder this time, repeating the amount as if volume would help. Again declined. She sighed dramatically. People in line began shifting. A man behind us groaned. A woman muttered something under her breath. The cashier scanned again and again, each beep sounding like a hammer striking my ribs. Then she said it loud enough for half the store to hear. "Your card is not working. Do you have anything else to pay with?" The man behind me chuckled. "Tax money at work again." A woman further back added, "Women like her always expect handouts." Heat rushed to my face. My fingers trembled. I opened my wallet even though I knew there was nothing inside. Mia tugged my coat gently and whispered, "Mommy, did we do something wrong?" That question cut deeper than any insult thrown at me. I shook my head and forced a smile I did not feel. "No, sweetheart, we did nothing wrong." The cashier shoved my things aside and began ringing up the next customer. I grabbed Mia's hand and walked out as fast as I could, blinking hard to keep the tears from falling. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, thick and wet, soaking instantly into my thin coat. My breath came out in shaky clouds as the world felt too bright and too loud. My grocery bag ripped as soon as the cold wind hit it, sending the cheap loaf of bread rolling onto the slush-covered sidewalk. A couple walked around us as if we were trash on the ground. I picked up what I could and pulled Mia close. "Let's just go home, honey." Our boots crunched through the snow as we crossed the small park near our apartment. It was usually empty on winter nights, but tonight the world felt strange, almost suspended. Under the dim streetlight I saw him, a man sitting alone on a bench wearing a dark coat that looked expensive. He sat perfectly still, as if the cold did not touch him. His hands were clasped together, his eyes hollowed by something heavier than winter. Even from a distance, his loneliness felt so sharp it pierced the air around him. I tightened my grip on Mia, ready to guide her past, but she stopped. "Mommy!" She tugged my hand urgently. "Mommy, he looks so sad." "I know, sweetheart. Come on." But she did not move. Instead, she stared at him with a thoughtful seriousness I had rarely seen. Then she whispered, "Can we invite him?" My heart skipped. Invite him. Invite a stranger. Invite a grown man sitting alone in the dark. Before I could respond, she slipped from my hand and took several tiny, determined steps toward him. "Sir," she called out in her small voice. The man looked up slowly as if waking from a trance. "Want to have dinner with us." My heart dropped to my stomach. "Mia!" I rushed forward and scooped her into my arms. "I am so sorry she did not mean to bother you. We should go." But then he stood. Not abruptly, not startled, just slowly like someone who had not stood for a very long time. Snow clung to his dark hair and the collar of his coat. His eyes met mine, and in that moment, everything around us went silent. There was something in his gaze that I could not explain. Not danger, not confusion, just a deep, aching loneliness that mirrored my own. It was the kind of emptiness that had nothing to do with money or status. It was the kind of emptiness you could live inside for years without noticing it was killing you. I clutched Mia closer as he spoke softly, almost like he was unsure his voice still worked. Did she really mean that? I swallowed hard. I do not know what she meant. We should get going. But Mia reached her tiny arm toward him again. Mommy makes good pasta. Want to come? And that was the moment it happened, the moment that split my life cleanly into before and after. He smiled. A small, fragile smile. And in the glow of the snowy streetlight, I realized that accepting my daughter's invitation might change everything. I just did not know how much. Not yet. But I would soon. Very soon. The walk back to our apartment was strangely quiet. Snowflakes drifted gently through the air, melting the moment they touched Mia's hair or the shoulders of the man following a few steps behind us. I kept glancing back, unsure whether to regret my daughter's unexpected invitation or to trust the tiny instinct whispering that maybe fate had nudged us all towards something none of us could see yet. When we reached my building, I pushed open the heavy door that always stuck in winter. The hallway smelled faintly of old paint and someone's leftover dinner, and the flickering ceiling light gave everything a soft amber glow. I turned to Daniel, unsure what to say, as he studied the narrow hallway like it was a foreign world. You really do not need to stay, I murmured. I know this place is not much. He shook his head gently. I would like to stay. Only if it is all right with you. There was something sincere in his voice, something quiet. Something that made the tension in my shoulders ease just a little. Mia pushed open our apartment door and ran inside, her boots squeaking. Welcome home, she announced proudly, as if we lived in a mansion rather than a creaky one-bedroom with thrift store furniture and a heater that liked to take breaks. Daniel stepped in carefully, as if afraid his presence alone might break something fragile inside these walls. He looked around slowly. The little Christmas decorations Mia had made from colored paper were still taped unevenly on the fridge. A tiny battery-powered candle flickered on the counter, and in the corner our mini plastic Christmas tree leaned to one side, its missing leg taped with 2 popsicle sticks. A soft warmth filled the room despite the cold. I felt suddenly embarrassed about everything. The chipped plates, the thinning rug, the way the kitchen sink dripped no matter how tight I turned the handle. I am sorry, it is so small, I said quietly. He looked at me with a gentleness that made my breath hitch. It feels warm. I cannot remember the last time someplace felt warm. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. I set the pot of pasta back on the stove to reheat, and Mia dragged out her crayons and toy dinosaurs, showing them to Daniel one by one. He crouched down, listening to her as if every word coming from her tiny mouth was important. When I placed the 3 plates on the little table by the window, I half expected him to politely decline, but instead, he pulled out the chair for Mia and waited for her to sit before taking his own seat. He folded his hands, looked at the simple meal, and said softly, "This looks wonderful." I felt myself blush. We ate quietly at first. Mia chatted the whole time, telling Daniel how she saw a dog wearing a sweater last week, how she thought Santa would be late because the snow was heavy, how she wished we had real Christmas lights, but the ones in the store were too expensive. Daniel listened with a soft smile tugging at his lips, nodding every so often, responding with gentle curiosity. There was no arrogance in him, no sense that he felt above this tiny table or our budget dinner. He ate carefully, almost gratefully, like he had not tasted food made with affection in a long time. After dinner, when I began clearing plates, he stood immediately. "Let me help. You are a guest," I said. He shook his head. "I do not want to be a guest. Not here." Something in his voice made the air shift. He took the plates from my hands and set them gently in the sink. Mia tugged on his sleeve. "Want to see my drawings?" He followed her to the small coffee table, looking at each picture as if he were admiring masterpieces in a gallery. I stood back for a moment watching them, watching him. He looked so out of place in his tailored coat and expensive shoes, yet somehow he fit into the room more naturally than I expected. When Mia held up a crayon drawing of 3 figures under a Christmas tree, she pointed proudly. "This is me, this is Mommy, and this is you!" Daniel's eyes widened slightly as he looked at the crude stick figure she had labeled with giant, shaky letters. He swallowed, looked at me, and then back at the drawing. Mia continued confidently. "We needed 3 people because a Christmas tree looks lonely without a family." Daniel's throat worked as he tried to respond, but only a soft whispered, "That is beautiful," escaped. Something flickered across his face, something raw and yearning. While I washed the dishes, I saw him out of the corner of my eye as he stood on the chair to adjust the flickering light bulb above our table. I opened my mouth to protest, but he smiled over his shoulder. "It was loose," he said. I tightened it. "It should be fine now." And strangely, it glowed steady afterward, brighter than before. A quiet moment passed where the three of us just existed together. No noise, no hurry, no weight heavier than the simple comfort of being near one another. When Mia began nodding off on the couch, clutching her toy rabbit, Daniel covered her gently with the old knitted blanket my grandmother once made. He did it so carefully that my eyes stung without warning. He stood there for a moment just watching her breathe, then turned toward me. "She is a remarkable child," he said softly. I smiled, tired and proud. "She has a big heart, bigger than mine most days." He shook his head slowly. "No, yours is bigger, much bigger than you think." I was not sure how to respond to that. Before I could speak, he whispered something so quiet I almost missed it. "Thank you for letting me sit at your table tonight. You gave me more than dinner. You gave me something I have not felt in years." I stepped closer without meaning to. "What is that?" He looked at me, eyes reflecting the warm light of the tiny candle still flickering on the counter. Belonging. For a moment, the world was still. Snow fell softly against the window. The heater rattled gently. Mia breathed quietly in sleep. And in the center of my tiny kitchen, a man I had known for only a few hours looked at me with the honesty of someone who had never been welcomed before. I did not yet know who he truly was, or what would come next, or how much this night would change everything about my life. But as I stood there, heart trembling, I felt it. He did not feel like a stranger. The apartment grew quiet after I carried Mia to bed, her small arms heavy around my neck and her breath warm against my shoulder. I tucked her in beneath the faded pink blanket she insisted on using, even though the edges were frayed, kissed her forehead and closed the door just enough to let the hallway light spill through. When I stepped back into the living room, Daniel was standing by the window, his hands in his pockets, staring into the falling snow outside like he was trying to remember something he had forgotten long ago. I hesitated before joining him, unsure if I was intruding on a private moment, but he turned his head slightly when he heard my steps. He stayed quiet, as if waiting for me to speak first. I said the only thing that felt safe. "Thank you for being kind to her tonight." His voice was soft. She made it easy. I leaned against the wall a few feet away, arms folded loosely. "You were quiet during dinner, not uncomfortable, just quiet." He nodded once, exhaling through his nose like someone releasing tension they had held for too long. "I am not used to evenings like this," I smiled gently. "Warm ones." His lips twitched with a sad kind of humor. "Something like that." Silence filled the space between us, not awkward but fragile, like we were standing at the edge of something we did not yet understand. Then he said almost to himself, "It has been a long time since I have been in a home that felt alive." I studied his profile. His posture was straight controlled, but his shoulders sagged slightly, as if even standing strong all the time exhausted him. "Did you grow up in a big family?" I asked softly. He let out a small breath, not quite a laugh. "Big house. Small family." I waited. He looked down at his hands, turning one wrist absently, as though he were adjusting a watch that was no longer there. "My parents traveled a lot. Social events, business engagements, holidays in different cities every year." "Sounds nice," I said, though I knew immediately it was the wrong assumption. His eyes met mine, and their emptiness stunned me. It was never about being together. The housekeepers raised me, tutors, drivers, private staff. Everyone except the people whose last name I have. I felt my chest tighten. "I am sorry," I whispered. He shook his head. "Do not be. Everyone thought I was lucky, wealthy, privileged, but I would have given all of it for one real Christmas. One where someone actually spoke to me, not about me. One where warmth came from people, not fireplaces." His voice grew quieter, almost breaking. "Money buys comfort, not belonging." I did not know what to say. I wanted to reach out, touch his arm, tell him he belonged somewhere, at least here tonight, but I did not know if I had the right. Instead, I said, You can belong anywhere. Kindness is welcomed. Sometimes people just forget they deserve it. He turned to me slowly, his eyes searching my face with an intensity that made the air shift. "Nora," he said quietly, "how long have you been doing this alone?" His question hit me unexpectedly, but I answered honestly. Mia's father left when I told him I was pregnant. He said he was not ready to be a dad. I was 21, scared, broke, and alone. But I had Mia. She gave me purpose. He blinked, and something like admiration flickered behind his eyes. "You must be stronger than you know." I let out a small laugh. "I am tired more than I am strong." His expression softened. "Even tired, you built a life for her. A warm one." I looked down, tracing my thumb over a chipped tile on the floor. "It is not much." He shook his head. "It is everything." For a moment, we both stood in silence again. The snow fell harder outside, tapping against the glass like tiny fingers asking to be let in. Then Daniel spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can I tell you something I have never said out loud?" I looked up. "Yes." He inhaled slowly, chest rising and falling as if he were pulling memories out from somewhere dark. When I was Mia's age, I used to sit on the staircase during Christmas Eve. The house would be filled with guests' laughter echoing through rooms I was not allowed to enter. I would sit there for hours watching legs walk by. Fancy shoes, designer dresses. My parents would pass me without seeing me. I swallowed the ache swelling in my throat. He continued, "I used to tell myself that someday someone would notice me. Someone would ask if I wanted to come sit by the fire or eat with them, or just be included." He paused, staring at his hands again. No one ever did. My breath hitched. "Daniel," I murmured. He shook his head as if scolding himself for even sharing. But tonight, while Mia was talking and laughing and drawing, something slipped out of him, unplanned, vulnerable, quiet. I used to wish someone would ask me to stay. The words hung in the air like a confession. Like a childhood wound finally exposed to light. I stepped closer without thinking, as if drawn by something deeper than reason. "Did you want to stay tonight?" I asked softly. He looked up at me slowly, and in his eyes I saw a man who had carried loneliness like a secret for far too long. "Yes." The word was so quiet I almost missed it. Then he added, "And I wanted to stay because I felt at peace for the first time in years." My chest tightened around something warm and aching. I had invited him in only because my daughter's heart had led the way. But now I understood why he accepted. Not out of politeness, not out of obligation, but because some part of him had been waiting for a door to open, a place to rest, a room with laughter instead of the echoes of empty halls, a home, even if it was not his. Not yet. I whispered, "You can stay as long as you need." He looked at me with an expression so raw and grateful that my breath caught. "You have no idea what that means to me." Snow continued falling softly outside, covering the world in quiet white. Inside the dimly lit room, a single sentence had slipped through the cracks of a guarded man and changed everything I thought I knew about him. And I had no idea it was only the beginning. The next morning came with a sharp wind and a sky the color of wet cement, the kind of cold that makes your bones feel hollow. Mia woke up coughing again, a tight little sound that made my stomach twist with worry. I gave her warm tea with honey, but her forehead felt warmer than it should have. Daniel had already left by then, though he had folded the blanket on the couch so neatly that for a moment I wondered if he had ever been there at all. He left a note on the table. "Thank you for last night. I did not know I needed it." I swallowed the sudden sting in my throat, tucked the note into the drawer, and bundled Mia into her coat so we could walk to the corner pharmacy for cough syrup. Snow blew sideways, scraping our cheeks as we made our way down the street. I carried her when the wind became too strong. Inside the pharmacy, the fluorescent lights were bright enough to make Mia squint and press her face into my shoulder. I found the cheap generic medicine and joined the line. The woman in front of me glanced back and then looked us up and down in a way that made my skin prickle. She was dressed in a deep green coat with fur at the collar, her makeup perfect, her nails long and red. She looked like someone who never had to worry about grocery bills or broken heaters or pharmacy coupons. Mia tugged my hair. "Mommy, my throat hurts." "I know, baby. We'll be home soon." The woman in front turned again, her brows lifting. "Some people just cannot keep their children home when they are sick, can they?" It was not even directed at me directly. It was spoken to the air as if she were commenting on bad weather. But it landed like a slap. I kept my eyes on the floor. 5 more minutes, I whispered to Mia, holding her closer. The man behind me muttered something about single moms and responsibility. I wanted to disappear. The cashier scanned items at the front of the line, while the woman continued complaining now louder. It is always the same type of people, too, expecting pity, expecting handouts, bringing their problems out in public. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. Mia looked up at me with watery eyes and whispered, "Mommy, are we the problem?" I shook my head quickly, kissing her hair. "No, sweetheart, not ever." But my voice wavered, and I hated myself for that. When the line moved, I walked forward and placed the medicine on the counter. The cashier barely looked at me, her tone bored. "Do you have insurance?" "No," I said quietly. She sighed loudly like I had personally ruined her day. "That will be $23.50. Before I could pull out my worn wallet, the woman in the green coat laughed under her breath. "Single moms always want pity. They make choices then expect everyone else to carry the consequences." Something inside me cracked, not loudly, not visibly, but with a soft, painful rip. I opened my mouth ready to apologize for existing, for taking up space, for needing medicine I barely had money for when a voice behind me cut through the room like a blade. "That is enough." My breath caught. I turned. Daniel was standing there, still in the same dark coat from the night before, snow melting on his shoulders, hair, wind-blown eyes sharper than I had ever seen them. But it was not anger in his eyes. It was something fiercer. "You do not speak to her like that," he said, stepping forward until he stood between me and the others. His tone was quiet but firm, the kind of voice that made the room go still. The woman scoffed. "And who are you?" "Someone who respects her." Daniel replied. "Something none of you seem to know how to do." The cashier stiffened, suddenly attentive. The man behind me shifted uncomfortably. The woman's face flushed. She opened her mouth to argue, but Daniel cut her off with a steady glare. "You do not know her. You do not know her life. You do not know what she carries on her shoulders every single day." His voice softened just slightly. "And you have no idea the strength it takes to do it alone." Each word landed like a shield around me, like armor I had never dared to put on for myself. I felt my throat close with emotion. No one had ever defended me like that. Not once in my entire adult life. The woman huffed, grabbed her bag, and stormed toward the door. Daniel turned back to me, his expression melting into something gentle. "Are you all right?" I tried to answer, but the words tangled in my throat. I nodded. "Barely." Mia reached out with her arms, wanting him. He took her from my arms without hesitation, holding her with surprising ease, her head resting on his shoulder like it belonged there. After I paid, we stepped outside. Snowflakes swirled around us in thick spirals, the street quieter now, the world muffled by winter. Daniel looked at me carefully, almost studying me. "You did not deserve that," I whispered. "I am used to it." "You should not be." His voice was steady. "Nora, people have no right to decide your worth." Mia shifted sleepily against him. Daniel brushed a strand of hair from her cheek with a tenderness that made my breath catch. She whispered into his shoulder, "You are our friend." He closed his eyes for a small second, as if the words pierced something inside him. Then he looked at me again. "You are not alone in this. Not anymore." For a moment, the cold air felt warm. For a moment, the snow seemed to fall more softly. For a moment, I believed him, and that frightened me more than anything. The next morning, the apartment felt colder than usual, as if the warmth Daniel brought with him had already faded into the walls overnight. Mia woke up talking about him clutching the scarf he had forgotten, insisting it still smelled like him, like winter and something gentle. I tried to smile, but something in my chest tugged uncomfortably, a reminder that men like him did not stay in places like ours. He had left early, leaving nothing but the faint indent of his body on the couch cushion and the scarf at the end of the bed. I told myself it meant nothing. Men like him had worlds to return to meetings people with polished shoes and expensive problems. We were just to pause a moment of quiet that warmed him for a night. I tried to shake it off as I tidied the living room, but as I lifted the blanket from the couch, something fell, a leather wallet, dark brown, worn at the edges in a way that did not match his immaculate clothing. My stomach tightened. I picked it up slowly. It felt heavier than it looked. I hesitated, but then I opened it expecting a driver's license, maybe a few cards, something mundane. What I saw instead made the air leave my lungs. Inside, behind a thin sheet of plastic, was an ID card with a name I recognized like a punch to the chest. Daniel Hale. I whispered it aloud, tasting it, trying to force my brain to connect the man in my living room to the name I had only ever seen in headlines. Hale, as in Hale Industries, as in the young billionaire CEO who had taken over the company at 28. As in the man whose face was on magazine covers for turning a failing corporation into one of the fastest-growing tech empires in the country. I stared at the picture on the card. The perfect, lighting, the sharp jawline, the meticulously combed hair. It was him, but not him. Not the man who had eaten leftover roast chicken at my table. Not the man who fixed my flickering bulb or listened to Mia talk about snow angels as if she were giving a TED Talk. My hands shook as I opened his wallet further. A sleek black credit card gleamed under the dim kitchen light. A metal card with an engraved logo. A business card tucked behind another flap, heavy cardstock embossed gold lettering. Daniel Hale, Chief Executive Officer. I stumbled back, gripping the edge of the table. No! No, that could not be right. Not the same Daniel who crouched to tie Mia's shoelaces. Not the man who had looked at my cracked apartment walls with quiet eyes and no judgment. Not the man who defended me at the pharmacy like he had nothing to lose. I felt dizzy. I dropped into a chair and grabbed my phone with trembling fingers. A simple search bar blinked up at me. Daniel Hale. I typed it. Articles appeared instantly. Photos. Videos. Headlines. The city's youngest CEO. Exclusive interview how he plans to change the industry. Billionaire bachelor steps out of board meeting. Hale Industries releases annual report. His face was everywhere. Clean-cut, sharp suit, confident stance. Not the man I had seen last night. Not the man who washed dishes with my worn sponge and thanked me for dinner like it was a feast. I kept scrolling. Another article. Daniel Hale spotted leaving a charity gala. Daniel Hale rumored to be stepping away from his family's old estate. Daniel Hale, the heir everyone underestimated. My breath caught as a tabloid headline appeared. Unconfirmed reports say CEO struggles with depression, isolating himself from friends and colleagues. I closed my eyes, a strange ache blooming in my chest. The loneliness I saw in his eyes. The way he held Mia like she was something fragile and precious. The quiet sentence he said at my table. I used to wish someone would ask me to stay. Suddenly, it made sense. Too much sense, and it terrified me, because if he was who the world said he was, then he belonged somewhere high above us in penthouses and glass towers, far from creaking floors and thrift store curtains, far from me. My hands tightened around the wallet until my knuckles turned white. I looked at the note still sitting in the drawer. Thank you for last night. I did not know I needed it. A sound choked in my throat. Of all people in the world, why would a man like him need anything from someone like me? Mia padded into the room, then her little voice sleepy. Mommy, where did our friend go? I swallowed hard. He had to go home, sweetheart. She blinked. Will he come back? I looked at the wallet still open in my hands at the name that separated our worlds like an invisible wall. I do not know, baby. She hugged her stuffed bear tighter, her lip trembling. But I miss him. So do I. I wanted to say, but I could not. Not when every part of me screamed that I should protect her, protect myself. Just then, someone knocked on the door. My heart flipped in my chest. I froze. The knock came again firmer. I opened it slowly. A delivery man stood in the hallway holding a small bag with Daniel's scarf folded neatly on top and a note taped to the front. For Mia. Thank you for letting me feel like I belonged. My knees went weak. The man handed me this bag and left without another word. I closed the door carefully, my breath trembling as I held the scarf and the note like fragile things. The name Hale rang again in my mind like a warning, a line between us I did not know how to cross, but the softness in his words, the warmth he left behind, that belonged nowhere except here. And I had no idea what to do with that truth. For 2 days, I walked around with Daniel's wallet hidden in the drawer beneath my socks, as if leaving it in plain sight might somehow summon him back to my door. Every time I opened the drawer, the name on his ID glared at me like a truth I was not ready to face. Daniel Hale, CEO. A man whose world existed in headlines and skyscrapers, not in fourth-floor walk-ups with peeling paint and neighbors who argued through thin walls. Mia kept asking when he was coming back. Each time the question struck like a bruise. Her small voice echoing through the apartment reminded me of how easily a child's heart attaches itself to someone who simply shows up with kindness, and how easily that heart can break. By the third morning, I could not stand the weight of the unanswered questions anymore. I put on my warmest coat, tucked his wallet into my bag, and told myself I just needed to return what belonged to him. Nothing more. But my hands would not stop shaking as I walked up to the glass tower downtown, a place so tall it looked as if it could slice the sky. Hale Industries was nothing like anything I had ever seen. An entire world encased in steel and glass. Men in suits and women in tailored dresses walked through the revolving doors with purpose, not a single one glancing at the woman standing outside the entrance, gripping the strap of her thrift store purse like a lifeline. I could have left. Should have left, but something in me, anger, confusion, maybe even hope, kept me rooted. I stepped inside. The lobby was all marble soft lighting and the cold hum of money. I approached the security desk. The guard barely looked at me. "Badge or appointment," he said flatly. I swallowed. "I'm here to see Daniel." "Daniel Hale." He lifted his eyes, then slow, dismissive. "And you are." I hesitated. A nobody, I wanted to say, but instead I said, "I have something he needs." He gave a short laugh. "Ma'am, Mr. Hale doesn't meet walk-ins, especially not without an appointment." The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were rude, but because they reminded me exactly where I stood in his world, outside it, permanently. I turned to leave, shame burning hot beneath my coat, when a familiar voice cut through the lobby. "Nora." My breath caught. Daniel stood there, coat over his arm scarf wrapped loosely around his neck, hair slightly mussed as if he had been running his fingers through it. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes deeper than the last time I saw him. But when he saw me, something in his face broke open, a light, stunned and soft like hope. The guard straightened immediately. "Mr. Hale, I didn't know she was expected." Daniel's gaze flicked sharply toward him. "She doesn't need an appointment. She's with me." He motioned for me to follow, and my feet moved before my brain did. We stepped into a private elevator, the walls reflecting our faint distortions. The doors closed, sealing us inside a silence thick with unspoken things. He spoke first, voice low. I was going to come back. I opened my bag and handed him his wallet. "You left this." He took it quietly, but his eyes stayed on me. "I didn't leave on purpose, Nora. Things got complicated." I let out a breath that sounded like a shaky laugh. "Complicated. That's one word for it." He looked away, then jaw tightening as if bracing for impact. "You Googled me." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He sighed, leaning back against the elevator wall. "I wasn't hiding who I am. I just wasn't ready for you to see that part of my life yet." I stared at him. "Why not?" He looked at me then, and I swear, something raw flickered in his eyes. "Because with you, I got to be someone real, not a CEO, not a headline, just a man sitting at a warm table with people who didn't want anything from him." My throat tightened. "And I didn't want to lose that," he said quietly. I didn't know how to make sense of any of it. The elevator opened into an office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. It felt surreal standing there, my worn boots tapping the polished floor. Daniel gestured toward the view. "This is my world," he said, "but it has never felt like mine. Not the way your kitchen did." His voice broke a little at the end. I didn't know what to do with that. I crossed my arms not out of anger, but to steady myself. You disappeared, Daniel. You didn't call, you didn't explain. I had to find out who you were from a search bar. He nodded, guilt shadowing his expression. The board is trying to force me into a merger I don't want. They've been threatening my position. Everything spun out fast. I didn't want to drag you into it. I stared at him. But you dragged me into it anyway, Daniel. Just without telling me. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. You're right. I handled it wrong. I'm sorry. The apology wasn't smooth or practiced like a CEO's speech. It was uneven human, the kind of apology that came from someone who wasn't used to offering them. I softened, but only slightly. You could have told me. He nodded again. I know, and I should have. But the truth is, I didn't think I deserved the place you gave me in your home, in your daughter's heart. My own heart clenched hard enough to ache. He took a step closer, cautious. I don't expect anything from you, Nora. Not forgiveness, not trust. But I want a chance to explain things. To earn my way back, not as a CEO, but as the man who sat at your table and didn't want the night to end. I didn't speak. Couldn't. Because the truth was painfully simple. I wasn't angry that he was Daniel Hale. I was terrified that he wasn't the Daniel who made my tiny kitchen feel like the warmest place in the world. The silence stretched. Then he whispered, Nora, please say something. I looked up at him. I just don't want Mia to get hurt. His shoulders lowered, relief and resolve intertwining. Then I won't hurt her. Or you. Not again. I breathed in slowly, letting his words settle in the spaces between us. And for the first time, I saw him not as a CEO or a stranger or a man out of my league. Just a man standing in front of me wanting a chance to belong, and wanting us to be the ones he belonged to. After that day in his office, something subtle but unmistakable shifted between us, like a door that had been cracked open and finally let a little warm air through. Daniel did not push his way back into our lives. He stepped back into them gently, almost cautiously, as if afraid one wrong move might cause the fragile thing we had begun to build to shatter in his hands. At first, he visited in the evenings, always after work, always knocking softly, like a man asking permission to enter a world he did not quite believe he had earned. The first night he returned, Mia hurled herself into his arms with such force he staggered back a step, laughing in that soft, surprised way that told me he wasn't used to being wanted. She grabbed his face between her small hands and said with all the stern seriousness of a 5-year-old, You can't leave without telling us again. Promise. Daniel knelt, placing one hand over his heart. I promise. I saw something flicker in him then. Something that looked almost like awe. He entered our apartment like it was sacred ground. He took off his shoes without being asked, hung his coat neatly, and moved with a quiet attentiveness that felt completely out of place for a man whose world revolved around power meetings and suits that cost more than my monthly rent. But here, he seemed to shrink into himself in the gentlest way, as if carefully adjusting his size so he wouldn't disturb anything that already existed. That first night, the kitchen light flickered again. I sighed, grabbing a chair to stand on. Before I even touched it, Daniel rested his hand lightly on my arm. Let me. I stepped aside, and he got on the chair, unscrewed the bulb, examined it, and muttered to himself like he was diagnosing a patient. Mia clapped from the doorway. Fix it, Daniel, please, he laughed. I'll try my best, sweetheart. When the light clicked back on, warm and steady, Mia gasped like he had just performed a magic trick. Daniel bowed theatrically. At your service. She wrapped her arms around his leg, giggling. He froze for a moment, startled, then slowly lowered his hand to her back, giving the most tentative, careful pat like he wasn't used to touching anything fragile. Later that evening, while I washed dishes, Daniel sat on the floor with Mia and helped her build a tower out of her mismatched wooden blocks. He let her climb into his lap. He let her boss him around in her tiny, authoritative voice. At one point, she said, You sit here. I sit here. We're a team. And Daniel just smiled the softest smile I had ever seen on him and said, That sounds perfect. Watching them, I felt something warm spread through my chest, something equal parts gratitude and fear, because I realized that Daniel wasn't just visiting. He was becoming woven into the small beating pulse of our home. Over the next month, he became part of our routines in ways that didn't feel planned but somehow inevitable. On Tuesdays, he brought pastries after work, always the same. Set one chocolate croissant for Mia, one plain for me, and one almond for himself. On Thursdays, he read bedtime stories to her, his deep voice giving dramatic flair to characters that had never sounded so alive. On Saturdays, he insisted on helping with errands, carrying grocery bags in both arms, as if he had trained for it, even though he clearly had not, judging by the way he tried to hide his grimaces when the bags cut into his palms. Every time he helped, he always said the same thing. "I'm not doing this because I have to. I'm doing it because I want to." And somehow that made all the difference. He asked about my day in a way no one else ever had. He remembered the little things I mentioned casually. If I said Mia needed new socks, he showed up with a small pack the next week. If I mentioned my back hurt after working the late shift, he found a heating pad on sale and brought it by like a treasure he had discovered. One evening as I cooked dinner, he leaned against the counter watching me. "You do this every night," he said quietly. I shrugged. "That's just part of being a mom." He didn't look away. "It's a lot. You do a lot." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. No one ever said things like that to me. Certainly not a man like him. Sometimes he stayed after Mia went to sleep, sitting with me on the couch as we talked in low voices so as not to wake her. He told me about his childhood, not the glamorous parts people assumed, but the loneliness that lived in the corners of enormous rooms where no one ever said goodnight or asked how his day had been. He told me about a father who measured love and success, and a mother who hid her sadness under pearls and designer dresses. I told him about being 23 and terrified when I found out I was pregnant, about losing friends who didn't understand about learning how to stretch every dollar until it nearly tore about nights when Mia fell asleep in my arms while I tried not to cry from exhaustion. And he listened, really listened, as if my struggles mattered to him as much as the board meetings he prepared for. There were moments when his eyes softened in a way that made my heart flutter, moments when his hand would brush mine by accident, and we would both freeze like two people standing too close to a fire they didn't know how to walk away from. But he never crossed a line, never made me feel pressured or uncertain. He was patient in a way that felt like a promise. One evening, after repairing the leaky bathroom faucet with more determination than actual skill, Daniel stepped back drenched from the waist up, and Mia burst out laughing so hard she fell onto the rug. Daniel looked at me, water dripping down his sleeve, and said, "I think your faucet won." I laughed so hard I had to lean on the wall. He grinned. "But don't worry, I'll beat it eventually." Watching him dripping and smiling in my tiny bathroom, I realized something terrifying and wonderful. He wasn't slipping into our world. He was fitting into it. Not like a guest, not like a visitor, but like someone who had been missing from it all along. That night, after he left, I sat on the edge of my bed, hands trembling slightly. What scared me most wasn't the possibility of falling for him. It was the possibility that I already had. The week Daniel vanished began like any other, with the soft click of my apartment door and the warm sound of Mia shouting his name, as if he were the sun returning after a long night. He had stopped by on Sunday evening with a paper bag of groceries, insisting he wanted to cook us dinner, even though he could barely figure out which burner switched on the stove. He laughed when Mia tried to correct his terrible pancake flipping technique. He teased me when I told him his pasta sauce tasted suspiciously like straight tomato from the can, and when he left that night, he looked back once as if memorizing the picture of us standing in the doorway. I didn't know then that it would be the last time I saw him for days that stretched like months. Monday passed without a message. I wasn't worried at first. CEOs don't exactly run on predictable schedules. Tuesday came and went in silence, and the quiet started to bother me in that low, buzzing way that coils in your stomach before your mind catches up. Mia asked twice, "When is Daniel coming over?" I said he was probably busy. By Wednesday morning, I was awake before dawn, staring at my phone, checking it every few minutes, even though there were no missed calls, no unread texts, nothing. I told myself not to overthink, not to assume the worst, not to believe that silence always means abandonment. But the longer the week stretched, the more it felt like something was unraveling inside me. By Wednesday evening, Mia was sitting on the couch with her chin on her knees, holding the little scarf Daniel had given her when he first visited. "Do you think he forgot us?" she whispered. That nearly broke me. I told her no, that adults get busy, that people don't just disappear when they care. But I wasn't sure I believed my own words. I tried texting Daniel a simple checking in, everything okay. It delivered. He didn't answer. On Thursday, I called him, straight to voicemail. His voice message was painfully formal, as if recorded by someone who didn't expect anyone to miss him. "This is Daniel Hale. Please leave a message." I hung up without speaking. That night, I lay awake listening to the radiator hum. My chest felt tight, like I was bracing for a storm without knowing which direction it was coming from. I tried to remind myself of everything I knew about Daniel, the softness he had grown into with us, the way Mia made him light up, the careful way he treated our tiny apartment like a home he treasured. But doubt has sharp teeth, and by midnight it was biting hard. What if he realized he didn't belong in our world? What if he woke up one morning and felt foolish for caring for people who couldn't offer him anything back? What if I was a temporary warmth he no longer needed? On Friday after work, I walked past the coffee shop near his office building. I paused, staring up at the massive glass tower bearing his family's name. I told myself I wouldn't go in. I told myself I wouldn't be that person. And yet, I found myself walking toward the entrance anyway. Inside security stopped me before I even reached the lobby desk. I asked if Daniel was in. The guard's expression tightened just slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am, Mr. Hale is unavailable." My stomach dropped. "Is he okay?" The guard hesitated, then lowered his voice. "There's a board situation. Big one. He's been locked in meetings all week." That was all he would tell me, but it was enough to soften something inside me, enough to scatter the worst of my fears. Still, I walked home with a knot in my throat. If he was in trouble, why didn't he reach out? Why didn't he let us in? That night, Mia crawled into my bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, and whispered again. Why isn't he here? I didn't have an answer that wouldn't hurt her. Or me. By Saturday, I felt hollow, as if the whole week had pressed its weight onto my ribs. I cleaned the apartment just to keep my hands busy. I washed Mia's clothes twice without realizing it. Every small sound made me look toward the door, and then, late that afternoon, I found something on the doormat when we returned from the park. A single envelope. My name on the front in Daniel's handwriting, unmistakably neat, but slightly uneven, like he had written it in a hurry. My heart stumbled. I opened it right there in the hallway. Nora. I'm sorry for the silence. I didn't disappear because I wanted to. I disappeared because I am fighting a battle I should have fought years ago, a battle for control of the company for the future I want instead of the one I inherited. I didn't want you and Mia pulled into the chaos, the press, the whispers, the pressure. I needed both hands free, but I need you to know this. I didn't walk away. I'm coming back. Please, wait for me. D. I read it 3 times. The hallway blurred around me. The ache in my chest loosened in a sudden overwhelming rush that felt like breathing after being underwater too long. Mia tugged my sleeve. What does it say, Mommy? I knelt and hugged her tightly, the letter crinkling in my hand. He didn't forget us, baby. He's coming back. She smiled so brightly it warmed the cold air around us. That night, as she fell asleep curled against my side, I held the letter to my chest and whispered into the dark. He didn't leave. Not really. And for the first time that week, I let myself believe it. The letter Daniel left on my doorstep changed the air in our apartment long before it changed anything else. It sat on the kitchen table the next morning, edges slightly curled from where I clutched it too tightly, as if holding it could tether him to us somehow. Mia kept walking around it like it was a sacred object, glancing at it with those wide, hopeful eyes that always reminded me of the first sunrise after a long storm. All morning she asked, "Can we read it again?" And I did, even though I knew every word by heart now, even though the ink had already begun to take root in places inside me I thought had stopped believing. By midday, I found myself reading it alone, tracing the lines where his handwriting dipped and hesitated, imagining his voice saying the things he couldn't bring himself to speak aloud. I'm fighting a battle I should have fought years ago. That sentence sat heavily in my chest. I knew what it was to fight alone to try to hold up the world with empty pockets and trembling hands. But something told me his battles were different, bigger, lonelier, and somehow that made my own heart ache for him more than it ever had for myself. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. My breath caught. I wasn't ready for him to appear, not yet, not so suddenly. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Daniel. It was Mr. Alvarez, the retired musician who lived downstairs holding a small tin of ginger cookies he baked every December. He noticed the look on my face immediately. Expecting someone, he asked kindly. I shook my head too quickly. No, just tired. He glanced into my apartment, eyes drifting toward the letter on the table.
Looks like you got something important.
My throat tightened. I forced a smile. Something like that. After he left, I sat on the couch and pulled Mia into my lap. She rested her head on my shoulder, warm and trusting the way children do before the world teaches them caution. "Do you miss him too?" she whispered. I closed my eyes. More than I should, I think. She lifted her head, studying me with a seriousness far too big for her little body. "Mommy, he didn't leave because he wanted to. He said he's coming back. Kids believe in promises the way adults believe in gravity. Unshakable absolute." I kissed the top of her head. "I know, baby. I'm trying to believe that too." Late that evening, after putting Mia to bed, I sat alone at the table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea I kept reheating but never drank. The city hummed softly outside, muffled by winter. I looked at the letter again, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I began writing back. Not to send. Not because I expected him to read it, but because my heart needed a place to land. "Daniel," I wrote, "I don't know what battles you are fighting, but I hope you win them. Not for the company, not for anyone else, but for the boy you once were who deserved warmth, the man you're trying to become, and for the version of you who sat at my table and made my daughter laugh like she was holding the whole world in her hands." When I finished, I folded the page and slipped it inside the envelope he left as if my words belonged beside his. Something about that small action made the room feel less empty. The next morning, I woke to the sound of snow falling softly against the window. The kind of snow that makes the world feel quiet and holy. Mia rushed into my room, hair tangled, cheeks flushed. "Mommy, did he come back yet?" "Not yet," I said gently. "But he will." She nodded as if that settled everything. Kids don't need explanations. They just need hope. Around noon, the building's mail carrier knocked on our door with a small package. He handed it to me with a curious look. "Fancy label," he said. "Didn't know anyone in this building had friends in places like that." My heart stuttered. I opened it slowly, my fingers trembling. Inside was a small wooden music box carved with tiny constellations across the lid. A handwritten note rested on top. For Mia, for believing in me when I forgot how. D. I sat down hard on the couch, breath shaking out of me. Mia gasped the moment she saw it. "Is it from him?" I nodded and lifted the lid. A gentle melody filled the room, soft and warm like a lullaby, sung in a language older than grief. Mia pressed the box to her chest and whispered, "He's coming back. I know he is." That evening, as snow deepened outside, I found myself pacing near the window. My heart felt pulled in two directions, relief and longing. The kind that hurts in quiet ways, the kind that soothes and breaks at the same time. I kept replaying his words in the letter. "I didn't leave. I'm coming back." It was strange how a single sentence could change the air inside your lungs, how it could turn fear into longing, longing into belief. Just before midnight, when the building had gone silent, I stepped onto the fire escape with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The city glowed in the distance. I whispered into the cold, "Come back to us, Daniel. Come home." And though no sound came in return, something in my chest softened. Because for the first time since he disappeared, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt like someone was fighting their way back to me. And that changed everything. When Daniel finally returned, he didn't knock. The sound of the door opening made my heart lurch so sharply I had to grip the counter to steady myself. Snow clung to his shoulders, melting into the collar of his coat, and for a moment he looked like a man caught between worlds, unsure which one he belonged to. Mia screamed his name and ran to him before I could move. He dropped to his knees instantly, gathering her into his arms with a tremor in his breath that told me this wasn't a simple visit. This was a man coming home after surviving something that cost him sleep peace and pieces of himself. I stood frozen by the kitchen hands, shaking as I wiped them on a dish towel even though they were already dry. When his eyes found mine, everything inside me tightened like my heart had been waiting for a signal to beat again. "Nora," he breathed, voice raw, almost cracked. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I nodded toward the table. We sat across from each other, Mia curled up in his lap like she'd never let go again. The music box he sent her sat open on the table, playing its soft constellation lullaby, and somehow that tiny melody held more emotion than anything either of us had said yet. "I'm sorry," he said first. The words came out like he'd been holding them behind his teeth for weeks. "Not for leaving. I didn't leave. I know I whispered because I did." But he shook his head. "No. I need to say this." His fingers brushed the wooden lid of the music box, tracing the carved stars. "I never told you why I fight so hard, why I disappear when things get heavy, why I don't let people close even when I want to." I leaned forward, heart pounding. "Tell me." He looked down at Mia, then gently shifted her to the couch where she instantly curled up and closed her eyes, worn out from happiness. When he finally spoke, his voice had that quiet brokenness I'd only heard once before the night he told me big rooms never felt warm. My mother was the kind of woman who loved too softly for the world she married into. She tried to protect me from my father's sharpness, but sharp things always find a way in. There were winters when they'd go days without speaking, and I'd sit on the stairs listening to the silence like it was something alive. I never knew when it would turn into yelling, or when the yelling would turn into nothing at all. That nothing, that was worse. He paused, looking at his hands. They trembled faintly. "Children notice things, Nora, even when no one thinks we're watching. I was groomed my whole life to take over the company, but not once did either of them teach me how to love anybody. Not once did they tell me I mattered. Not once did they hold me when I cried. So I learned to disappear. It was the only thing I was good at." The words felt heavy in my chest, like they were landing not just in my ears, but in the softest part of me. He continued quietly. "I met someone a few years ago, a woman who said she loved me. I believed her. Or I wanted to. But when things got complicated and the board began circling like vultures, she left. She said I was too much, too broken, too distracted for someone like her." His jaw tightened. "That's what I thought would happen here. That's why I stepped back, because the closer I got, the more I cared, and the more I cared, the more terrified I became." I swallowed my throat thick. Terrified of what? He lifted his eyes to mine. Of being someone you couldn't depend on, someone Mia couldn't depend on, someone who would disappear when storms hit instead of standing in the doorway and blocking the wind. The room felt impossibly still. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just let his truth fill the space between us until it softened into something tender. When the board moved against me, he continued, "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to see the part of my world that eats people alive. I didn't want that weight on you. I didn't want Mia to see me bleeding. But I should have trusted you with the truth. I should have trusted myself to stay." My voice finally returned small but steady. "I didn't need you to be perfect, Daniel. I just needed to know you weren't choosing to walk away." His breath exhaled shakily as if my words loosened something rusted shut inside him. "I'm not walking away, Nora. Not now. Not again. Not ever." He leaned forward, then elbows on his knees, face in his hands for a moment, before speaking again, softer than I'd ever heard him. "Do you know what scared me the most?" I shook my head. He lifted his eyes. "That this little apartment, this mismatched table, this tiny world you built with so much love, felt more like home than any mansion I grew up in, and I didn't know what to do with that." My chest tightened painfully beautifully because I understood that feeling better than anyone. Mia stirred on the couch, rubbing her eyes. "Is he staying?" she mumbled sleepily. Daniel turned toward her, voice breaking just slightly. If your mommy wants me to. Mia looked at me waiting. For the first time since he disappeared, I felt something inside me settle like a door finally unlocking. I met Daniel's eyes and whispered, "Then stay." His shoulders dropped as if I had just lifted 100 invisible pounds off them. He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, but I didn't. Our hands met in the middle of the table, fingers threading together like they'd been waiting for that moment longer than either of us realized. For the first time, he wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a man fighting a boardroom war. He wasn't someone who vanished under pressure. He was simply Daniel, a man choosing to stay. And in that small apartment with snow drifting against the window and Mia curled between us like the heart of our makeshift little world, I felt something shift inside me too. Not loud, not dramatic, just soft, steady, real. The kind of truth you don't say with grand gestures but with presence. And maybe that was all any of us ever needed. The night of the gala arrived colder than any winter I could remember, the kind of cold that seeped through your coat and settled quietly into your bones. I stood in front of the mirror in our small apartment, smoothing the simple navy dress I borrowed from a neighbor. It wasn't fancy, but it was the nicest thing I had worn in years. Mia twirled beside me, excited, even though she wasn't coming, insisting on pinning a tiny paper star she made onto the strap of my dress. "For good luck, Mommy," she whispered. When Daniel arrived to pick me up dressed in a suit that looked carved from midnight, he paused in the doorway like he had forgotten how to breathe. His eyes softened, and for a moment the world shrunk to a single warm glance between us. "You look," he exhaled. "You look like someone I'm proud to stand beside tonight." My heart clenched, not in the painful way it used to, but in a way that told me something was growing quietly inside both of us. On the drive to the gala, I watched the city lights streak past the window, shimmering against the falling snow. I kept wondering what people like me were supposed to do in rooms like the one we were going to. How to act, how to breathe, how not to get swallowed by the feeling of not belonging. Daniel reached over, squeezed my hand gently, and said, "You belong with me. Every room I walk into, I want you there." That helped, but my stomach still fluttered with nerves as we arrived at the enormous glass building, glowing with gold light and luxury cars lined up like ornaments. Inside, chandeliers dripping with crystal reflected light onto polished marble floors. Guests with gowns worth more than my monthly rent glided through the room holding champagne flutes. Daniel placed a gentle hand on the small of my back, guiding me through crowds filled with executives, socialites, and donors who had likely never stood in line with an EBT card that failed or counted change for groceries. And yet his hand felt steady, protective. It said, without words, "I'm here. I won't let you drown." Still, as we walked, whispers began floating behind us like icy drafts. "Isn't that the single mom he's been seen with?" One woman said loud enough for her pearls to tremble. Another chuckled softly. "Some women know how to climb fast." It was the kind of laugh that cuts without ever raising its volume. I stiffened, heat rising in my face. My fingers tightened around my clutch. I felt that old humiliation crawl up my throat, threatening to choke me. I tried to step away so I wouldn't embarrass him, but Daniel gently pulled me back to his side as if anchoring me. "You're shaking," he whispered. "Talk to me." "It's fine," I lied. "I'm fine." He didn't believe me. And then it got worse. A woman in a shimmering silver dress approached us, her expression dripping with the effortless cruelty that only wealth sheltered from consequence can perfect. "So Daniel," she purred, "is this your new project?" My breath caught. My heart thudded against my ribs. Project, as if I weren't even a person, as if being poor erased my humanity. Daniel didn't answer her. He stepped closer to me instead, his hand finding mine. I tried to pull away, but he held firm, not possessively, but protectively. The woman smirked. "Oh, come on, darling. We all know how these stories go. Men like you always go for the sweet charity case eventually." I felt something inside me crack. Not because of her words, but because a part of me feared she might be right. Maybe I didn't belong here. Maybe this was all temporary. Maybe I was foolish for thinking someone like him could really choose someone like me. I opened my mouth to excuse myself when Daniel suddenly stepped away from me and walked toward the stage. The room quieted, conversations softened, heads turned. When he reached the microphone, he didn't speak immediately. He scanned the crowd as if searching for the exact hearts he needed to address. Then his eyes found mine, and he smiled. Not politely, not socially, but softly, intimately, as if this speech existed for one person only. "I know there are questions about who I walked in with tonight," he began, voice steady and warm. A few people laughed nervously, but he didn't flinch. "And I think it's time I answer them." My breath held. The room was silent now, every gaze locked on him. "Some of you wonder why someone like me would choose someone like her," he said. I felt my cheeks burn. And here is the truth. I didn't choose her because of where she lives or what she earns or what she wears. He paused. I chose her because the first time I ever felt at home was in her kitchen. Whispers rippled through the crowd, but he continued stronger now. I chose her because her daughter made me laugh for the first time in years, because she shows kindness in a world that's forgotten how, because she made me remember who I wanted to be before the boardrooms and bloodless expectations. He breathed in, voice thickening, and because she treats me like a man long before she ever learned I was a CEO. A hush fell. I felt tears sting my eyes. He kept going. "Let me be extremely clear. She is not climbing. I am the one who fell, and she is the one who lifted me." The entire room froze. Then applause began slowly rising into something full and generous. People turned toward me no longer with suspicion, but respect, curiosity, even warmth. I felt something inside me mend something that had been cracked for years since the day I first stood alone with a baby on my hip and fear clawing at my spine. When Daniel stepped off the stage, he walked straight to me, ignoring every outstretched hand along the way. He took mine again and whispered, "If you ever doubt where I stand, remember tonight. I stand with you, beside you, always." And for the first time in my life, in a room where I once felt I didn't belong, I realized I did, because he had made space for me, because he had chosen me, because he wasn't just protecting me, he was honoring me. And that night, beneath glittering lights and applause that still echoed like a heartbeat, I let myself believe in something I'd always feared I was worthy of being stood beside. The year that followed felt like watching my life slowly thaw after a long winter, the kind that settles deep into your chest and convinces you nothing will ever bloom again. Yet somehow buds begin appearing one by one when you least expect them. After the gala, Daniel became part of our world, the way dawn becomes part of a long night, not with fanfare or noise, but by showing up again and again in small ways until the dark simply wasn't dark anymore. He started spending mornings with Mia before school, tying her shoelaces with a seriousness that made her giggle. Then he'd read her favorite books in the evening with voices that made every character come alive. He never missed dinner no matter how chaotic his company became, or how many meetings piled up. Some nights he emailed from the hallway just to make sure we were asleep before he left. Other nights he stayed long enough to fix another little thing around the house, a cabinet hinge or a crooked shelf, and then lingered as if he didn't want to walk away from the warmth inside. It wasn't grand gestures that built our life. It was steady, quiet presence, the kind I had never known. By October, he asked if we would move in with him. He didn't ask with diamonds or flowers or the nervousness of a man trying to impress a woman he barely knew. He asked with a carton of Mia's favorite yogurt in his hand because he had bought 6 and had no place to put them, and suddenly it became clear that he had been making space for us long before he ever said the words out loud. But I said we needed time, because love the kind that heals doesn't grow rushed, and Daniel didn't push. He only said, "I'll wait as long as you need." Thanksgiving passed with him at our small table again, cutting turkey beside Mia like he'd been there every year of her life. And then December arrived, and with it came the soft ache of memories, the ones I used to shove down every Christmas because they hurt too much. But this year, everything was different. One snowy afternoon, Daniel asked if Mia and I could come with him somewhere. He wouldn't say where. He only smiled the kind of smile that felt like a secret wrapped in hope. We drove through the city past holiday lights tangled around lampposts, past store windows glowing with impossible prices, until we reached a quiet street lined with tall pines and soft, golden light spilling from houses that looked like they belonged in Christmas cards. The snow fell slow and gentle, thick enough to soften the world. Daniel parked, then took a deep breath as if readying himself for something he had waited years to do. "This way," he said. We followed him down a narrow path toward the park at the end of the street. I recognized it immediately: the small hill, the frozen pond, the old bench under the evergreen tree, the place where he had sat alone last Christmas Eve when Mia asked him to dinner. And now it looked nothing like it did then. A real Christmas tree stood under the evergreen, taller than Daniel, wrapped in white lights that glowed like tiny stars. Silver bells hung from the branches. A single red scarf was tied near the bottom like a memory preserved. There were 3 ornaments on the lowest branch, each with a name written in gold paint: Daniel, Nora, Mia. My heart went still. Daniel turned to us, snow gathering on the shoulders of his coat.
I came back here every week this year,
he said quietly. Sometimes just to sit, sometimes to think, sometimes because I missed the moment that changed everything. Mia ran ahead, her boots kicking up puffs of snow, and she spun beneath the tree as if it belonged to her. Maybe it did. I stepped closer to Daniel, my breath visible in the cold, and asked softly, "Why did you bring us here?" "Because this is where I found the first piece of home I ever knew," he said, "and I want this to be the place where I ask you something that has nothing to do with promises or expectations or fear." He reached into his coat. I felt my breath catch, but he wasn't holding a ring. Instead, he pulled out a small wooden ornament carved in the shape of a house. He placed it gently in my hand. On the front was carved one tiny word: "Ours." He looked at me, not nervous, not unsure, but steady.
"Nora, you gave me something last Christmas I didn't think I'd ever deserve. A place at your table, a place in your daughter's laughter, a chance to be a man who could love and be loved without hiding." He took a breath that trembled slightly. "I don't want to visit your world and ask to stay for a night. I want to build a life with you, if you'll have me." My eyes burned. The wind brushed snow across our feet, and then Mia ran toward us, throwing her arms around both our legs. "Can we stay with him forever, Mommy?" she asked through a bright smile. "He needs us." I laughed through tears, because she was right. We all needed one another. I looked at Daniel, at Mia, at the tree under falling snow, and the answer came without fear. Yes. His exhale was a sound I will remember forever, part relief, part joy, part disbelief. He lifted Mia into his arms, then wrapped his other arm around me, pulling us close. Snow fluttered in circles around us like the world was blessing the moment. He whispered, "You invited me into your life when I had nothing. Let me invite you into mine now. Stay. Not for Christmas, for always." In the glow of the tree, with snow settling on our shoulders and Mia giggling between us, I finally understood something I had never known before. Home isn't a place. It's a person. Sometimes 2, sometimes 3. And as we stood there under the winter sky, held in the warmth of a man who had once sat alone on that very bench, I realized something simple and breathtaking. I thought my daughter had invited a lonely stranger to dinner, but she invited us into the life we were always meant to find. And that Christmas, for the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving. I was home. If you're still here with me, then maybe this story reached a place in your heart that has been quiet for a long time. A place that remembers what it feels like to stand on the outside looking in, to hope someone will notice your loneliness, your efforts, your silent battles. Maybe you saw yourself in Nora trying so hard to hold life together with hands that never seemed to rest. Maybe you saw yourself in Mia offering kindness without hesitation, believing that love can still surprise us. Or maybe you saw a part of yourself in Daniel carrying success on the outside, but emptiness on the inside, quietly wishing for one simple thing, a place that feels like home. If this story stirred something in you, even just a small ache or a warm spark, I want you to know this: you are not alone. Life gets heavy for all of us. Sometimes the world humiliates us.
Sometimes we lose people we never thought we'd lose. Sometimes we sit in rooms full of people and still feel invisible. But stories like this remind us that unexpected kindness still exists, that broken families can become whole in ways we never imagined, that healing finds us in the quiet corners of life where we least expect it. Maybe you've lived long enough to know that love rarely arrives wrapped in perfection. Sometimes it comes as a tired single mother warming canned soup for her child. Sometimes it comes as a lonely man who does not know how to ask for help. Sometimes it comes as a little girl who has no idea that her small voice can change a life. And sometimes it comes in the form of a story that reminds you that hope is not gone no matter how many winters you have lived through. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own Christmas memories, or the people you've loved, or the people you've lost, or the ones you're still hoping to find, then consider joining us here. Subscribe to this channel not for numbers, not for algorithms, but because you deserve a place where your heart is allowed to feel again. A place where stories honor the quiet heroes of everyday life. A place where second chances are not fantasy but possibility. A place where kindness still wins. Every story we share here is crafted for people like you, people who have lived enough life to understand that the smallest gestures often carry the deepest truths. And if you've ever been the one who opened your door to someone, or wished someone would open theirs to you, then you belong here more than you know. So before you go, take a moment. Breathe. Hold on to whatever emotion is sitting in your chest right now. Let it stay with you. And if you want more stories that lift, heal, restore, and remind you of the best parts of humanity, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Turn on the notifications so you never miss the next story that might arrive exactly when you need it. Thank you for staying to the end. Thank you for listening with an open heart. And wherever you are tonight, may you feel the warmth of a home you deserve, even if it's still on its way to you.